Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. All right, so before we get started with today's podcast, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the James Webb Telescope, because evidently, Scotty, that's going to be starting to send more pictures back here in another month or two. Yeah. And here's I think the really most intriguing or most exciting part of that whole thing, I guess, is that it's going to look so far back into space. Well, how would you do this? Okay, the Big Bang. According to the Big Bang, the universe is, a certain size and a certain age. And this telescope, now the Hubble telescope did this too, but didn't have a sufficient focus, so they couldn't really tell what they were looking at. But according to that, the far, far distant galaxies that we would see are so far out there, so far away, that it took light, the calculated age of the universe, to even get here. So basically, we will be looking at galaxies that were forming right when the universe was first forming. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. According to the Big Bang Theory, then, those galaxies, see physicists can tell, astronomers can tell by looking at a galaxy how old it is. And so according to that theory, those galaxies that they're seeing should be in their infancy. They should be very young galaxies. Does that make sense, Scott?
Sure.
Yeah, because the light's coming from the very beginning of the age of the universe, kind of like that.
It's traveled. It's had to travel.
Yeah, it had to travel that long to get here, So according to that theory, then, they're going to see galaxies that are in their infancy. But it's possible, some physicists, I don't know how many, but a good number, are arguing that what they're going to see aren't going to be galaxies in their infancy. They're going to be old, developed galaxies that have been there for a long time. And if that is what they see, it just blows the Big Bang Theory right out of the water. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think in terms of that second theory of they're going to see?
Well, here's the thing. It's a good question. Here's the thing. The Hubble already did see one galaxy that was older than the Big Bang Theory said the universe was. And so right away, that it doesn't make sense. Why would there be a galaxy out there that old? And so that kind of shot a hole in the Big Bang Theory. But as is the identity with paradigms that we've talked about so much,
sure.
A lot of the pro-Big Bang theorists are refuting that. In fact, there are people that tried to post things, I understand, on Wikipedia and that, who's really pro Big Bang, and like Harvard University, very pro Big Bang, the physics department. And so Wikipedia just won't post it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Well, that dynamic seems to be happening on not just this particular thing, but
everywhere.
Things in general. Yeah.
Everywhere. And like I've talked about the biologists, they did a computer analysis of Darwin's theory and said it can't be right because evolution happened way too fast. And so what did the mainstream biologists just ignored that, and I've explained that there's something that sped up the evolution of species, and that is that the underlying essence of existence, that unified field, that source of coherence, was welling up coherence and intelligence into the whole process, kind of like gravitating species to evolve in a direction of more coherence, and that's why it happened faster. But anyway, it'll be fun and fascinating to see what happens. So what they actually see when they look way, way back into the time of the origin of the universe, and we'll see what kind of galaxies were there. Yeah. All right. Well, and you're right, Scotty. I mean, that whole thing applies to everything, really. But what we're talking about today is the anatomy of oblivion, kind of the same thing, huh, Scott?
Yeah.
And then versus, the blueprint for utopia. There's a blueprint for utopia, a harmonious world peace, like that. Not to get on too much of a tangent here, but world peace isn't going to come about by a bunch of people holding their hands and swaying all at the same time and praying for world peace. I mean, that's a nice thing. It's beautiful, but there's a lot more to it than just that. So I think a simple analogy is really germane here. And that is that if you have two children, think about it. Let's say you're a school teacher and you have two children that are fighting on the playground. What's the first thing you do? Scotty, what? You separate them, right?
Yeah.
You stop fighting.
Yeah.
And then what's the next thing? What's the next thing that people might do, Scotty? What might the teacher do next after they got them separated?
Well, I think it'd be a good idea to find out what's going on.
Exactly. That is exactly what they would do. Now, what are these kids going to say right then? Oh, he stole my crayons. No, they're my crayons, right, Scotty?
Right. Yeah, they're going to advocate for their side of whatever.
Their side of the thing, and all that's going to do is inflame things. And let's say the teacher makes a decision. How's that going to affect the kids? One kid's going to get powerful, and I was right, and the other kid's going to be what? Is the kid going to? Okay, I was wrong. No. Yeah. The kid that loses that argument is going to be more angry, more resentful. So it's just going to inflame the situation, right, Scotty?
Right. Yeah.
Now, what's really okay after the teacher separates the kids? What really needs to be the next step there to get anywhere? Get them to calm down, right? If you could get the kids to calm down, and that could take, little kids and that, I mean, well, adults too, for that matter, they're probably not going to calm down in 30 seconds,
Right.
In fact, that's why a lot of times I tell people, when you're in a conflict, just let it go and see how it feels tomorrow or the next day. Take a shower, have a bowl of ice cream, something.
Sure.
But that's not easy to do. And but the point being, you're not going to get a healthy resolution until things calm down. And that doesn't just apply to two little kids, fighting on the playground. Ukraine and Russia. There's going to be nothing coming from that that's any good. And I mean this now on a global level with, people being innocent civilians being bombed, a whole nation being demolished, it's not going to be easy to calm down in a situation like that. And understandably so. I wouldn't be able to calm down, but nevertheless, that's going to be the only real solution. Otherwise, resentments are just going to build no matter how it shakes out. If Ukraine becomes part of Russia or if Ukraine maintains its sovereignty, And then, Scotty, I saw this one politician on the news the other day, and he was saying that we should have debates. Why not just have people get together and have a healthy debate? What do you think about that, Scotty? I got an opinion on that. I don't like the word debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just feeding the argument, So if they're going to get together and have a discussion about that sort of thing, I don't even think it should be a debate format. So maybe we need to create a whole new format for conflicts. And this applies to the legal system too. Instead of, one attorney trashing the other attorney, their arguments back and forth. What about okay, one side, you say to them, okay, so how do you see this? What's going on? And they give their perspective. And then you ask the other side, okay, can you repeat their perspective? And you have to start out with, oh, I see your point. You do have a good point there. There's a good point. There's something of value in that. And then they repeat it. And then it goes the other way. Now you give your perspective, and then the other side says, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. And it can't just be lip service. It's got to be sincere. You got to see what they're saying. And just to take the advantage of Ukraine and Russia, just as an example, Russia would say, well, Ukraine's part of Russia. The Soviet Union has always been for hundreds of years. I think Gorbachev was from Ukraine, wasn't he? And Chernobyl is in Ukraine. And so much of what we've associated with USSR through the years, that's Ukraine. And that's their breadbasket to boot, And of course, then Ukraine would respond, well, in, what was it, 2013, Scotty, I think it was. I'm pretty sure that's right. But at any rate, in recent history, they came to an agreement. Russia agreed and Ukraine agreed that if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, which they did, then Ukraine would be a sovereign nation. Did you know that, Scotty?
I heard that.
Yeah, that was an agreement. And so they would make that argument, And you don't get anywhere, though, if people just take a stand and dig in their heels, and it ceases to be a discussion and a meeting of minds, becomes a debate and an argument. And you're not going to attain any meeting of minds or any settlement when people are so polarized, and when there's such a habit. And here's the point of society and human mentality being so identified with the surface. Because now think about this, and this is maybe far-reaching for people, I don't know. But like with the little kids in the playground, it doesn't care who's right and who's wrong. It doesn't matter whose crayons those were. And even in global affairs, because let's say Putin wins and Ukraine becomes part of Russia, or let's say in an election the Democrats wins or the Republicans win. What's that going to do? What's that going to accomplish? I'll tell you what it's going to accomplish: more polarization.
Yeah, fires.
If the Republicans win the next election, the Democrats are going to be more enraged than they already are, and vice versa. So the thing is, though, in global affairs like that, you can't sit down and have the leaders come together and say, okay, everybody calm down. Maybe little kids, maybe after a few days, they might even forget about it. I don't know. They may not, but at least it's going to help. And so what has to happen? Are we going to just continue with conflicts and arguments and polarization and increased resentment? Yin creates yang is put in the Chinese system. Up creates down, left creates right. Right creates wrong. The ancient seers, and it's such common sense. It's like we have to be victorious before the wars even start. And how do we do that? We cool the whole thing down. And how do we do that? There's an underlying basis, right, of existence that is a source of infinite coherence, infinite harmony. It holds the whole world of polar opposites in a unified state. It's sort of like you have a tree and you have the trunk of the tree, and it's got all these different branches, but they're all rooted in the same trunk. That's how existence works. That's how life works. And there's a technology that the ancient seers provided where we can radiate out that unifying value, that harmonizing value, that integrated value. It's not like getting all the branches of the tree to think the same way, to be the same way. Some will go that direction, others will go that direction. And that's fine, provided there's an underlying basis of harmony and commonality. And that's what's lacking in the world today. Even our approach to problems makes the conflict even worse. And that technology and I've talked about it. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here at Mount Summit. It is a technology. I mean, we could, if we want to, just hold our hands and sway and pray for world peace, and that's a nice thing, you know. But imagine, I mean, that you could compare that to like, okay, there's such a thing as static electricity, but imagine and just take a look at what we've done by creating the technology of electricity and building the internet, the camera you're watching me on, everything. So if we take the technology of world peace, and it is a technology, we can create a harmonious world. But it's a sophisticated technology. It's a technology that's there, described in its fullness in the Vedic literature by ancient rishis, ancient seers. But it's gone largely ignored. It's gone ignored. It's gone ignored. Why? Because people are so caught up in the polarizing perspective. The little kid had his crayons stolen, he's mad. And that's what makes the world go round. It's got to stop. And the only way it's going to stop is if we take that deeper value, that unified field value, that source of harmony, and facilitate it to well up through all levels of existence. You see, otherwise, the branches of the tree are harmonious with one another because they're connected to the root. They're connected to the trunk. If they're like tumbleweed, not connected to the trunk, it's a mess. And they're all flying in different directions, and they die, and nothing comes of it of any value, you see. Anything else on that, Scotty?
Well, what's interesting too, we've been playing Little League baseball.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And for so long, the whole dynamic of sports has gone to everybody wins, everybody's included. There's, this whole thing like that. But now it's kind of interesting to see that everything's kind of swinging back a little bit to holding kids accountable. There are winners and losers. There are going to be times where you're going to make a mistake, and it's okay. You have to pick yourself up and get yourself together and move forward. And
it's just such a great analogy, Scotty.
Yeah.
Because what's the solution there? Is the solution holding hands and swaying and say, oh, okay, we're all winners. The score doesn't matter. Or is there a deeper value to that? Is there a deeper meaning of that?
All right.
And the deeper meaning of that would be, oh yeah, we won, hooray. And these guys over here, oh, we lost, oh, I'm so bummed. But if there's a base, if there's a foundation, it's called a sense of self in both sides. See, the deepest value of the self is that unified value, that value that is one with everything. That value that, if that value is strong, you can have a passion in any direction. You can be a Democrat, you can be a Republican, you can think he stole your crayons, or he can think you stole his crayons. But if there's that deeper value that people just spontaneously live from and rest into, then they have what's called a mature relationship with the surface of life. And that's what these kids should be taught, Scotty, huh?
Yeah. No, it's interesting because we played the same team twice. It's almost like during the week. So like on Thursday, we had played this team, and we had come off of playing two teams that were, they're not as good as some of the other teams. So we just like crushed everybody. And then this team on Thursday, they were good, and they showed up, and we just kind of, thought we were going to roll right through everybody, and nobody was, it just, and we got slapped, they got beat bad. And that's, everybody was bummed, but then you just had to talk with them and say, hey, this is what happens. Now you have a choice of what you're going to do. What are you going to pick yourselves up and, or are you going to dwell on that, that situation. And we said, the choice is your guys's,
Yeah, it's right there. It's amazing how long in conflicts, anything like that, rivalries,
yeah,
global conflicts, interpersonal conflicts, even in a marriage, what have you. It's amazing how long people can have the sense of self, the sense of unification, be so totally overwhelmed by the polarization of perspective based on the surface. And that's the stuff wars is made out of. That's the stuff wars are made out of.
right.
It's unbelievable, Now here's an interesting thing. Once every year now, it got suspended for a couple of years with COVID, but they're coming back now this year. So, and hopefully in perpetuity, once every year, a group of fifth graders come to Mount Soma, and I give a lecture, a little talk. They're great. I love these kids. I'm telling you, yeah, it might even be the most fun, or certainly it's one of the most fun things I do every year. And so this year, and I've done different things in the past. I've done like one year, I just did fun facts. If you've got a room and the room's been at a certain temperature for days, why is it that when you touch a piece of metal, it feels cold, and you touch a piece of wood and it doesn't? That's one. Is the sun closer to the earth in the winter or the summer? There's different things like that. And they enjoy it. We have a lot of fun with it, And then, in another year, well, this is actually interesting. It kind of relates to what I'm going to talk to him about this year. Another year, I talked to him about so many problems in the world, and we get so caught up in the problems. But I said, there are solutions. And it's a matter really of technology. We can find technologies to solve. See, that's the one thing we could argue about the oil and gas and how it pollutes. Well, maybe instead of trying to develop technologies and actually developing technologies, building windmills and building solar panels, maybe if we took a small fraction of that money and put it in research and development, we could actually come up with a viable technology, something that really is effective for airplanes and everything else, Anyway, that's kind of tangential, but I thought this year, things when I talked about that, and they said the technologies are out there and they will come about. The kids loved it. I mean, one kid came up to me, he was crying, tears. He said, he was going like that. Oh, this is so good. Oh, thank you. He didn't have words because we've taken on such a defeatist attitude and imposed it upon our children. The world's going to end in 12 years, all this stuff. And these poor kids, so just the idea that, hey, we can fix all of this was just revolutionary for these kids in a very positive way. So anyway, this year, I think I'm going to do something that it could change, but right now I'm playing around with the idea of asking them if they know what discernment means. And I'm going to tell them that, Adi Shankar, a great saint, one of the pivotal characters in the whole Eastern philosophy, called the spiritual path the path of discernment. And I'm just going to ask them, what is discernment? What do you think discernment is? And I'll be interested to hear what they have to say. Of course, I've talked on the podcast about how discernment isn't just an intellectual process. It's also an experiential process, resting deep into your own being and feeling into that, and integration into the depth of your being. And the gateway to that is refined feelings. But a lot of times people, they think, okay, I'm integrating my thoughts with what? My emotions, my superficial feelings, my anger, my hatred, my resentment, my polarization against other ideas. That's not discernment, And so I think, I'll have to see where it goes with them. It's not going to be a planned talk by any means. It's going to be an interactive thing. And then I'll ask them, what is wisdom, And then also culture. We talk about cultured pearls. We grow pearls are cultured over time. And that's what a culture is in society. I'll talk to them about that. A culture is there to culture the awareness of the people. And so the healthier the culture is, the healthier the people that come out of that culture. And so a lot of times, we may see some lack of health in our culture. And so we try to throw out the baby with the bathwater and just have a whole revolution. And that doesn't work because, again, that's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So I'll be interested to see where it goes with them. And also tradition. Is there a valued tradition? Well, yeah, there is, because it becomes a touchstone that upholds society. Holidays, family, for goodness sake. All these things. And so it'll be great. I'm sure it'll be a lot of fun to talk with them, and see. These kids are great. I mean, you give them a chance to talk and reflect, and they come up with some great stuff, What else, Scotty? I think that might be, let me see if I had any big points I wanted to be sure to bring up here. This other thing, I was tempted not to even say it because it can sound, I hope you hear it right, but it's like small worlds. So many people live in such small worlds. They have a worldview, they have a perspective. They have a perspective on everything, on their religion, for example, a perspective on, opposing political views, a perspective on how things should work, a perspective, you name it. I know a guy who only buys Folger coffee. And I said, well, why do you only buy Folger coffee? Why don't you try to know? He said, this guy's like in his 70s. And he said, no, my mother always only bought Folgers, and that's good enough for me. And we have a good relationship. We're good friends. I mean, I love the guy, I do, and so I just kind of smiled. I shook my head and said, small world, But we could extrapolate that out. And so many of us function that way. It's a small world. But now here's the thing. If you're living in a small world and you say, oh, I'm going to expand I'm going to be a person of vision. I'm going to see beyond the horizon of the little world I was brought up in, that can lead to anarchy. And then you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You're turning your back on a culture, you see? I remember I was in, I don't know if I said this in a podcast or not, but I was with a really great spiritual teacher from India. And some woman asked him in the group, it was a big group. And she said, was concerned about diets. And she was saying that, people, I forget, eat bananas when they're not ripe, and that's not good for them. And so the saint, really, the guy's a saint, he responded by saying, well, just give them what your mother would give them. And I think that's when she brought up the bananas, actually, for her children, give them what your mother would give them. And that's when she brought up the banana. And he said, well, then give them what your grandmother would give them. Because she said, my mother doesn't know about bananas and what's good. And so he said, and that didn't satisfy her. But see, there was a deeper meaning there that really transcended the idea of bananas and what your mother would say or what your grandmother would say. It's about there's a fiber of integrity in a culture, in a tradition, in a family. And we can find the value in that and treasure the value in that. That's the moral fiber of a society. That's the moral fiber of a family. That's the moral fiber of a culture. That culture is the awareness of the people. And so, yes, we can purify it and stuff. And there are things in different cultures that are obviously not right, and we can evolve it. But if we're not careful, we start shredding that fine fabric, tearing away at it, that fine fabric that upholds and nurtures all the people. And so it's a delicate balance. And the art of discernment, the path of the discernment, is the path of evaluating that, judging that, figuring that out. And it's not just done with the intellect, and it's certainly not done with passionate emotions. It's done with that deepest feeling level, that refined feeling level that dwells in the depth of our being, beyond emotion, beyond bias, beyond indoctrination, beyond the limitations of a small world view, but not at the expense of the fine fabric of a culture that refines and cultures the awareness of the people. We evolve our cultures, yes, but we don't abandon them, and we don't to impulsively come to conclusions. And that's about it for today, Scotty. Anything else?
No, I think you got it.
That does it. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.